Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about, not about theguardian.com, I'm going to talk to you about inclusive design today. It looks awful on this projector, as predicted. So, right, I'll start with a bit about me. Henry Charge, obviously, lurking around the office, full-time on a project at the moment, but trying to get here as much as possible to the office. And doing brown bags is a good way to get time to come here. So for the last 3 years I've been working on gov.uk services, starting with Find Apprenticeship, which was one of the 25 exemplars that went live in 2014. Previously I worked on private sector projects, and as is kind of widely known in private sector projects, accessibility is kind of an afterthought. Since working on public sector projects, it's clear how important accessibility is, and actually working with disabled users, it's really eye-opening at how we need to help them, but also by helping them, it helps us create better products for everybody. So GDS, if people don't know, was set up to transform government, and every service has to go past a service assessment. And one of the main things they look out for is your service accessible? Have you tested with disabled users? It's not one of the 18 standards, but they're looking to actually get it in as an extra point on that service standard to make it as clear as possible. Alistair Duggan was brought in about 6 months ago. He was previously the head of accessibility at the BBC. He's now head of accessibility at GDS, and he's creating this big drive to make sure all services, they might have passed their assessment previously, but a lot of them actually weren't accessible, or they claimed to be, but they weren't as accessible as they said they would be. So he's now going personally to every project and making sure that their service is accessible and that they're testing with the right kind of people. He's also set up an accessibility group, so a mailing list, I think it's about 100 people at the moment. So that includes the whole disability network at civil service. And about 6 months ago I went to their first meetup. So I was over at the Firefox or Mozilla offices up the road. And I met a lady called Carwai Pun. I'm going to talk a lot more about the work that she's done a bit later on. But basically she was working on these posters that there was 3 at the time, and they sort of showed really clearly how you can make your services accessible. I took a keen interest. I said, oh, that looks really useful for something I was working at the time. We were working with a supplier called Cubics, and they were providing online tests to us. Part of the tender was they had to pass the WCAG AA compliance, and they didn't at all, but we had no choice but to go live with them. I made it part of my prerogative going forward to actually visit their offices and talk to them a bit about accessibility. And these posters were perfect, they came on at the right time. They weren't finished yet, but I used them and did a presentation to Cubics. And that went really well, and I used it as a lightning talk also, sort of the 45 minutes condensed to 5 minutes just to run through those posters. So, there are 11.2 million people registered as disabled in the UK.
11.2?
Yeah, mental. So obviously only 8% of those have a wheelchair, and not all disabilities are visible. To put it in context, 8% of all men suffer some kind of colour blindness, and 10% of the UK have some kind of dyslexia, and dyslexia is a disability. But accessibility does not mean disability. So that's why I haven't called this talk my accessibility talk. That's why I've gone down the route of inclusive design, because I think accessibility has been tarred with too much of a brush of being hard or expensive. And I know that on a previous project I worked on, it was a real afterthought, and it was like an additional add-on that we can make it accessible for X amount. And they said, well, no way. We haven't got any disabled users, is a common thing that you hear. That's definitely not true. You've probably got a disabled user in some way or another, and I'm going to go on to what I mean by that. And it's not just about adding attributes to your HTML. A lot of people say, oh, how do I make it accessible? And they start to say, oh, we have to have an all attribute on your image, or all these kind of tidbits of advice, but that's not the way you should think about accessibility. It shouldn't be hard or expensive. If you think about accessibility from the start, you won't have these add-ons that have to come at the end of the project. You won't have a sprint where you're quick, let's make this accessible. Think about it from the very beginning. It'll be something that will just come as standard as part of your product. And any good front-end developer should have accessibility as part of the toolkit. It's as important as having the right CSS and having it visibly how the designer expects it to be. So, if you make it easy to use for everyone. Okay, everyone should be familiar with the concept of user needs in the public sector, especially. And you want as many different people to be able to use your product as possible. So these are all the sort of things, or some of the things you can think about. Not all of these are disabilities, not all of them are permanent disabilities. So you can imagine you're on a cramped tube. At that point in time, you've got some sort of disability. You've got a constraint on the way that you're using the device. But you've also got things that aren't really thought about. So you might be from a different background to someone. You might have trouble hearing them over a loud room or something like that. These are all the sorts of things you should think about. So situational disabilities, which is what I was sort of touching on earlier on. These are some really nice graphics that I didn't design. I previously saw the touch one, which I showed in my lightning talk. So if you can't read it, it's so someone with one arm, so that's a permanent disability. Someone might have broken their arm, that's a temporary disability, and then a new parent, or you could even say someone maybe holding a beer while they're trying to use their laptop. It's the it's the same kind of thing. And you've got someone's deaf, someone with an ear infection, and a bartender trying to hear your order over the music. Someone that can't speak, someone that's got laryngitis, or someone with a really heavy accent, someone that's blind, someone that's got cataracts, or a distracted driver. Ideally, we wouldn't be designing for drivers, but yeah, I see where they're going with that. So what accessibility really does mean is universality. So if you make something easy to use for someone with an impairment, more than often it's going to be easy for everyone to use. So what universality means is the quality of involving or being shared by all people. This is another good graphic that I saw. I found this through the accessibility group, someone shared it. So I presume everyone can read it, but it says that the kid in the wheelchair is saying, can you shovel the ramp? And he says, oh, I'll shovel the ramp later, I'm shoveling the stairs for these other kids first. I said, well, if you shovel the ramp, everyone can get in. Okay, so if you clear the path for someone with an impairment, you're clearing the path for everyone. Now this quote really resonated with me. Everyone should be able to do what they want to do in a way that suits them. Right? It's kind of obvious, but the web is accessible by default, and we actually break it, so it's our responsibility to fix it. And if you're not doing it for the perceived disabled people, do it for your future self. And this is a stat that I haven't actually looked into whether this is true, but it says 83% of disabilities in the UK are acquired during work. Yeah. So you never know. Think if you're designing something, think if you had an impairment later down the line, how you would use your own product. And maybe you haven't found your disability yet. So again, it's the kind of thing, the situational disabilities, you think, oh, hang on, yeah. So products, so this is kind of going off the theme of if you make something accessible for somebody, it's helping everybody. Now these are 3 products, there's tons out there that you can pick. The OXO potato peeler was invented for a chef's wife that had arthritis about 20 years ago. Turns out that potato peeler is actually more comfortable for everyone to use, and it's now a really popular product. SMS messaging was designed for deaf people to communicate. And now, obviously, speak for yourself.
Wow.
Yeah. And something that I actually thought about a few months ago when I saw this pattern coming up on Facebook and Twitter. Obviously, some videos have the captions actually baked in. I've seen this really nice pattern that people are using now. If you've got your phone on mute, some videos, the captions turn on when you put your phone on mute, right? So it's an obvious pattern that people use social media in situations like public transport where it's not acceptable to have the sound on loud. Having captions means you can watch the video and you don't have to wear headphones, or you could sit at your desk at work and maybe watch a video on the sly.
No, you can't.
This is one that I'm not 100% sure if Apple got their inspiration from, but I was watching a video a few months ago about people using their computers with different kind of devices. This guy is from the neck down, and he uses this product called Keystrokes. And I instantly noticed the kind of similarity between this section here and the predictive text that Apple brought in 2 years ago. And that was way before 2010 they had keystrokes. So it's kind of a testament to how you can bring inspiration from products that are out there for disabled people. Obviously, vice versa, right? In the last 10 years, the amount of people that have had products and services open up to them because of modern devices is astounding. iOS has accessibility built in. Really nice example is this guy here, and make that. It's called the blind Tommy Edison. So he's the blind film critic. He's got 28,000 Instagram followers from photos that he takes himself, and he's completely blind. He does that all through his iPhone. He's also got a YouTube channel. I just think that's amazing. The future. So I see this as an opportunity for disabled people and the elderly to really have their horizon broadened. I've seen on the accessibility group already Chris Moore, who's the accessibility champion, kind of really getting excited about Amazon Echo. He bought an Amazon Echo for himself. He's completely blind. He uses it for simple tasks, and I think, as we talked about at PS Day, these kind of government services, or these things like when's my bin collection due, that kind of thing, for a blind user, that's probably almost impossible to look up in the state that a lot of council websites are. So things like Amazon Echo and Google Home are only going to make this a lot better. I think by 2020, 30% of websites will have converted over to some kind of conversational UI. Right, so now that hopefully I've convinced you to make services accessible, here's how you can design to include everybody. Now, I've already talked about car white pun. So I did my lighting talk, which I talked about, where I broke down the posters she was working on. There's now 6 of them. A few of the bits are actually repeated across the different disabilities. But what it's doing is breaking it down into these kind of 6 main groups of disability, and spelling out the things that you should do and the things that you shouldn't do. I'm going to go through exactly what the posters include in a minute. But one thing I should say is that this blog post that went out in September has had hundreds of shares, and it's had worldwide acclaim. And part of the reason for that is it's been open source since the start, and there's now 6 different translations. It's all in SVG, it's all easily translatable. It's now in Chinese, Spanish, German, all of the main languages. So these are the posters, or some of the main things. I'm going to show you some examples of what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And then real world examples. Now, Jack Fitzgerald talked about this a bit at PS Day, his lightning talk, about how we should write in plain English. It makes a lot of sense, right? Don't use idioms. Say what you mean, okay? These are our terms and conditions. We actually took them from Find Apprenticeship and tweaked them slightly. They had really good feedback from users. I ran it through, so there's a little node tool that you can install called the Flesh Scale, or it uses the Flesh Scale. I've got the command, you can install it in later on, but so I pointed it at our prototype with our terms and conditions. We've got 96 out of 100, very easy to read, easily understood by an average 11-year-old student. Okay, I won't tell you whose terms and conditions these are, but they scored 59 out of 100. Okay, there's no way a website should need terms and conditions like that. If it's difficult to read, no one's going to read them, and then what's the point in having them in the first place? It's not valtech.com. It is. Build simple and consistent layouts. There is a green button there as well. Contrast, I guess. That's the lesson from that. Don't needlessly clutter your layouts. Using techniques like mobile first is a really good way of making sure that you've got everything that you need on that page, and you're not bringing in things just because you've got the space to bring it in. People with autism or anything like that will get totally overwhelmed, and they'll spend time trying to just work out what's going on the page. But that's the same with everybody. It's going to make it a lot harder for people to read the content in your site. So this is taken from the NHS beta site that's live at the moment. You just go to beta.nhs.uk and see the work they're doing. It's a really nice example of just a clean layout. All the main content is focused on the left-hand side, and there's one really good reason to do that. If you keep all your content, all the main content on the left-hand side, people that Zoom will use things like Zoom text, and they're focused on one side of the page, or one part of the page at a time. They can easily just scan down your page rather than having to go up and round to read your content. So keep everything in a logical order. Now this one's an extreme example. I think this is a joke website, but it kind of illustrates the point. It illustrates all of my points. So just don't do this. Describe visual content. Okay, don't put images. Don't put text in images. And if you've got videos, you should supply captions. Kind of obvious, but as we learned off it earlier, it helps people that aren't disabled as well. This is a really nice example. So they've changed the style slightly recently, but this is actually taken from the online test provider that I talked about earlier. They had something called the E-Tray, which was completely inaccessible previously. They built it from the ground up with our help. And this is one of the parts of the background documents. Previously it was just an image, and you'd have to work out, so you use all these background documents, and then what you have to do is then answer some questions afterwards. They've now actually described what's going on, which makes it easier for everybody, also people with sight issues, that they can actually be able to answer these questions. And this is testament to that. I constantly look at the feedback that comes in. We have anonymous feedback that's gathered from our services. And I actually sent this over to Cubics, the test provider, because I thought it was really good bit of feedback for them, and some positive feedback after all of the negative feedback we gave them when we first encountered them. Basically, he used the old E-Tray, which some providers are still using, and now he's used our E-Tray, and he's saying, well, can I commend you on the accessibility of this test environment? Far less stressful experience, which is nice. And this is what you shouldn't do. This is a website. I've got another GIF from this website that it used to be horrible for a lot of reasons, and they've done a redesign and it's still awful. So things like browser, even the fact that you can barely read that. But it's also, that's an image. The whole thing is an image. These are 5 images with text in them. That when a screen reader when a screen reader encounters them, all it's going to say is image. They've got no alt text. So yeah, don't do that. Built for keyboard use only. This is one that I think really is useful for everybody. If you go to any project that involves programmers, most people don't want to lift their hands off the keyboard. If you're forcing someone to use a mouse, it's probably going to make them just close the browser window. So I've got some examples. So I'll create an account page, which everything follows a logical order. It's really clear when you're focused on an element, and you can tab and tab up and down the page easily. Let's skip to the next one. And this is where my other example, the same website that had the text as images. So I'm actually tabbing around the page at the moment. So the first tab took me down to the bottom right to fill my name and email in. And you can just about make out that I'm tabbing, but hardly anything has an outline on it when I'm tabbing to it. So I'm constantly pressing Alt tab on here to try and navigate around the page. It's completely unusable. For someone with a screen reader, that would be the most infuriating experience. Write descriptive links and headings. Now, I don't know if anyone knows, if somebody's using a screen reader, the first thing they do on a page is they scan the page to see what all of the landmarks on that page are. So they use things, mainly headings, so H1 to H6, and links. Okay. If you have a link that says click here, it's just going to read click here. They're not going to know the context of that link outside of it. So this is taken from some service on gov.uk. You can see that the links, they make sense outside the context of these paragraphs. This is one that I just mocked up to show you what you shouldn't do. Here's a great article about how to build accessible websites. Click here to read it. They're never going to find that article, so don't do that. You see it so often that people say click here, thinking maybe our invite to the launch party said click here.
We wanted to keep it exclusive.
Yeah.
Riff-raff going.
So this is quite a good example. I didn't mean for it to be this, but that's actually in a green box again. Combine colour, shapes and text. So this is mainly aimed at colourblind people. It's very difficult to distinguish elements from the page if they're the same shape but just a different colour. If you really need to distinguish something, then use a shape instead. So do this. This is nice that the projector is so bad because it illustrates how well this is designed.
Happy we can help anyway.
So for something like a line chart, which is the classic example, use different shapes to distinguish the different series on the chart. And this is another one I mocked up that, as well as not being able to see that there's actually 3 lines on there, believe it or not. They're also, all of the markers are circles, so for someone with colour blindness, they wouldn't be able to distinguish the different series. Now, this is it clear enough? So, right, this is really nice. There's an app that you can get called Sim Daltonism, and you can choose all the different types of colour blindness, and you can see it live in your viewfinder, what you're looking at, how that would look to someone that was colourblind. So what I did is I pointed at the slides, and you can see that the one that's designed with colour blindness in mind shows up a lot clearer. These ones all look roughly the same kind of colour. And that one's to show people with no red cones. I'm not going to try and pronounce the name of it. Okay, use large clickable areas. This is something that you'll probably recognise this kind of pattern from gov.uk. Not only does it help people with motor problems, but also if you want a touch screen, it's a lot easier to hit the big clickable area. It's something I'm designing at the moment, so I thought I'd use it to show you how we did it. So all of these they work really nicely. You can quickly select the checkboxes, but again on a mobile, it'd be really clear. That's again something I just mocked up to show you. Don't do this. The amount of times I see this on a website where you have to click on the actual 20 pixel hit area just to select the radio button. At least make the label clickable, right? Otherwise it's probably not going to work for a screen reader tool. The screen reader will just read out radio button, which is I was gonna get a video of how the older online tests used to appear to a screen reader. Literally, the entire test is 36 questions with like 10 different radio buttons in each question, and every one just said radio button. That's all the screen reader could hear as they went through the tests. Let users adjust contrast. Now there is an image there that you can barely make out because of the contrast, ironically. This is something where at Gov.uk they're looking at bringing some kind of tool to enable users to actually save their own settings on a website. So people with dyslexia, they quite often prefer reading on a different background. So black on white is quite difficult. The words and letters sort of jump around the screen. But on this also you can adjust the font size. You can make it Comic Sans if you want. I'm not sure what that is. So they're actually looking at bringing something like this into Gov.uk. But there's also one that a few of you might have used on your phone or on your Mac if you use Safari, which is the reader view, which has some really nice customizable settings on it. And I actually use the grey background when I'm reading. I find it easier to read, especially on the iPad. So you can do the font size up and down. You can change the font family, and that saves when next time you open a reader view, you'll have your settings saved. I haven't got a don't do for this one. How you can test it yourself. So obviously if you're designing something on the web, you should be able to test it works in the way that you designed it. These are all things that you can do yourself. JAWS you have to pay for, so it's probably best to leave that to someone that has the license for that. Also, if you're testing with users, you should probably go to where they work, because every user with assistive technology has got their setup in exactly the way that they want. So for HMRC, that meant we had to open up the IP whitelist to the HMRC offices so that we could let people log in with their own system and go through those. And also, if you're on a Gov project, there's a network of 100 and something people that have actually volunteered to be kind of guinea pigs for your service, and you can send an email out to them. I think Sam Quell at OLCS used them. They're really helpful. Chris Moore, who's the accessibility champion, he went through our service with every single combination that's possible to use. So all iOS with VoiceOver, also NVDA on Windows. And that's pretty much everything I wanted to go through. Kind of read. This is the readability checker CLI tool to check your web page and how readable it is. It's the repo for the posters that Carl White Fun's done, so you can download them and print them off, put them up in your office. And two people that have helped me a lot recently, Alice Duggan and Carl White Fun. And this is a good blog category to follow, which is Accessibility and Me. If you haven't seen it, it's really eye-opening. It's people in government that have some kind of disability, and they write about their experiences. There's a really good one that came out the other week about dyslexia. It's really good to watch. And that's it. Thanks so much.
I have a question. If accessibility is designed for everyone, how is it different from just having a good user experience?
It isn't. It's part of that. It should be thought of as part of the interface building process. It's part of a user experience, I'd say.
Do you find you have to make design compromises though? I'm not necessarily saying it's the wrong thing to do, but inevitably to be able to make wide spaces for mobility, you could argue it should be like that, but inevitably that limits your design options. Yeah. Is there ever a scenario where you would say that actually you should compromise on accessibility in order to get a design done?
Yeah, so there's a good example with Gov.uk. their hint text just about fails the contrast contrast on the WCAG guidelines, the contrast ratio. But they've kind of let that slide because they feel that the design, it makes it a lot clearer that hint text is hint text by having that contrast ratio. And users that want to adjust it can, if they're having trouble reading it, they've got their own setting they can apply to it. There's a few examples recently where Google have suddenly changed. I don't know what services it is, but they've changed all of their text on their page and it fails the AA contrast ratio now. And there's a massive uproar about that. And they've done it purely aesthetics because the lighter grey looks nicer with their brand. It's difficult to find examples, but there's generally, if you make something more accessible, it makes it nicer to look at anyway. I'm not saying make everything like web-safe colours and everything doesn't have to be black and white like gov.uk. But I think that generally you can find a way to make a compromise.
What are Google favourite on? Is it the colour?
Yeah, so just the foreground text on the background colour. Yeah, you see it quite often with big companies that break even gov.uk, they were breaking their own style guide.
But if you think about it, you're building the website to deliver content, not to show off the design. It's just secondary stuff.
Exactly.
I mean, you hinted at it at the start of the talk, Henry, but would you say that because a lot of the gov.uk public sector stuff, there's almost an inclusiveness, a democratic principle at work here, that citizens that you're engaging, if they're accessing government services, then there's a heavy political price, if you like, of excluding people, making them hard to access. So for that reason, we should look to something like those services for the better examples or better practice of inclusiveness in design than perhaps the commercial sector.
I'd say so. Yeah, for sure. I couldn't think of any website that isn't something like BBC is a really good example of good accessibility, but again, that's kind of a similar situation. They're providing a service for people, not a free service, but NHS again is another government service. But also all of the council websites are normally really accessible.
Sorry to be so callous about it, but actually I wonder whether, even though the government of course are kind of honour bound to make the services successful as everyone, I wonder whether the real breakthrough would be, you're 11.2 million people in the UK, which is like 1 in 5 people, or whatever it is. That's actually a commercial thing. If you design a site where 1 in 5 people can't purchase your shit, then actually that's crazy at all. And I just wonder whether actually that government is a breakthrough when you can build a business case for, because inevitably, inevitably there is a cost to making it accessible. There is some expensive person like yourself, even if it's an extra couple of days or whatever it might be, sometimes it could be more, to validate with screen readers, whatever it might be. But if that's actually a commercial decision, the business case is there because you are shutting yourself off from 1 in 5, 1 in 10 users, whatever it might be. I think there's a very interesting commercial comparison.
There was an example recently, so the design patterns hackpad, so there's a service called hackpad that gov.uk used for their design patterns. They were bought by Dropbox, and Dropbox then decided they wanted to transfer everybody over to their product called Dropbox Paper, which is again this kind of collaborative, free-to-use documenting tool. And Dropbox Paper was completely inaccessible, and they were going to lose GES as one of their, I don't know, probably their biggest user of hackpad, purely because they wanted to transfer them over to Dropbox Paper. And because GDS have been threatening with removing themselves from this product, they've kept them on hackpad at the moment. They're keeping everyone on hackpad, and they're working to make sure that Dropbox Paper is accessible.
Perhaps maybe this is a little bit too cynical, but it seems to me that when we're going back to the terms and conditions, I'm wondering there's certain situations where it actually works to the advantage to make those terms and conditions very difficult to parse and understand. You just wanted that call to action and say, I agree without reading it.
So cynical and so young.
Just bear with me on this.
But it's an interesting sort of view of actually whether, so we're just about to do something to the website, redeploy it in some sort of way, but I wonder whether we just need to do a review of it, right, and just send it to group who ultimately run it, because,
Think about Apple. So a lot of their products and devices are perhaps very accessible and easy to use, but their terms and conditions, if anybody has got the skills to be able to use it, then I think there's a reason.
I think we should hire a lab, get a few users in, give them Valtech.com, video them using the service. That is when you really realise, like, what am I doing? Who am I to say that this person can't use my website? And then I think you'll get them crying. Yeah.
I wonder, is there any kind of heuristic for most of the projects? So, whilst the government ones will probably think a lot about it, rightly or wrongly, the commercial clients will probably be less on top of their priority list. So I wonder if they were to say to us, Google would say to us, right, what's the minimum standard test? Because realistically, you're not going to test for everything or get this chap in from the BBC who's going to come. So is there like a minimum list of things that everything?
There's literally a list. It's, so what you should aim for is AA compliance with WCAG, which is the World Congress of Accessibility or something, guidelines. You should know that acronym. They have a level system. So A is what, like, you've got to basically, if you don't pass A compliance, then you're not even trying. AA is what you should aim for.
Loads of writing in it.
Yeah, essentially. They've got a whole checklist, and it's split into kind of the design considerations, but also all the technical things that you should strive for. You should aim to not fail any of the AA. There's AAA as well. I mean, Gov.uk doesn't even try to pass AAA. There's a really nice website where someone's built this. The whole thing is it shouldn't be a checklist, but it kind of is a lot of the time. And that's they've converted the list into a checklist that you can actually split off. That's split into different groups. So it's got like what a QA should look out for, and they can check through. It's also got it broken down into project managers as well. So that's the main thing. But it's a legal requirement, so a lot of them don't realise it is. It's probably the only thing on your website, well, one of the only things that you could get sued for. You could have a court case brought against you. There was really famous, I think it was Ryanair, or one of the big cheap flight companies, that they got done for not having accessible service, and they had a big court case against them.
Which level do they need legally?
I think on that they don't look at the level, it's whether or not somebody was able to use the service.
Presumably you had to pay extra to run out for the accessible version.
Yeah.
We're talking about 11 million people, right? Potential customers that we can lose. It's actually more. What you said, that I'm using the website in YouTube. I'm using this using one hand. At home, I keep my laptop with one hand. I'm using it on the other. Right? It's the same. Alexa, it's probably similar technologies in cars, right? You have another customers that can do shopping or use your service while commuting, right?
I actually agree with you. I think I agree with compel an argument for thinking about accessibility for people with permanent disabilities as a way to think about the ways in which you might be contextually disabled, if that's the right expression, by having a baby in one arm or drinking with your laptop or whatever that was about. So I think it's actually really quite a nice way of thinking about design. Quite nice. I like it a lot.